All right, we're going to talk about the accumulation phase here today. So if you're in the accumulation phase, you're in the process of going up the mountain and going towards retirement. And so when you're in the accumulation phase, you need to be worried about different things than when you're in retirement and coming down the mountain. In the accumulation phase, we often see people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s would be the type of people who are in this phase. People who are making a higher income, who are looking to build their nest egg in the future here. So we're going to go over a lot of topics here. The first thing I want to talk about is, why do we want to invest? So what is the purpose of investing? So when we look at it over time, if we just keep all of our money in our bank account, right, we're not going to see a high return there in interest. Let's say that that's 1%. Well, what do we know about the historical average of inflation? Right now we're seeing really high inflation numbers, but historically, this may be 3%. And so if we leave all of our money in our bank accounts, it's protected, it's available, but we're not keeping up with inflation. So my question to you is, are we losing money by keeping money in our bank account? We're not technically losing money because it's going up in value, right? If you have 100,000 here, then that 100,000 is going to turn into $101,000 at the end of the year. So you're not losing money. But what you're doing is you're taking this $100,000, and when you go down, you got to keep up with $103,000. And can we do that by keeping it in the bank? So what we're doing is we're losing purchasing power. So how do we overcome this? This is where we look to invest. And so when you invest, the historical average, let's just call it 7%. If you have $100,000 over time, that should be 107,000 is what it should grow to each year ongoing. Obviously, this is not guaranteed, but that's what we would expect over a longer term. And so that's the idea here of why we want to invest our money, is to get more growth potential so that we can beat inflation and we can keep up with the growth ongoing. So that would be one of the reasons here too as well. So the next piece I want to talk about is another part one of why do we want to invest, is for this growth over here that I'm talking about. So there's something called the Rule of 72 that I want to educate you on. So the Rule of 72, what this says is that if you have, let's call it $5,000. If you have $5,000 today, then that will double in 10 years if you get a 7.2% return on your money. And so that's what we're going to use here to go through this. And that says that you don't contribute any money. It means you don't take any money out. We just let it sit there and cook, marinate, bake, and just sit there for the future. So if we have $5,000 in 10 years, this will turn into $10,000. And then in 20 years, this $10,000 will then double again. And now you're going to end up with $20,000. And then we can do this again. If in 30 years this doubles, then we're going to end up with $40,000. And you can see here how this can really add up over time just by letting our money sit, cook, marinate, bake over time. We can end up with $40,000, with $5,000 turned into $40,000 just by taking advantage of the Roth IRA or whatever investment it is up front. So that's how the power of compound interest is what it's called over time. So that's how that works. So next we want to talk about, how do we invest? What do we want to look to invest in? And so if you are, someone who's in the accumulation phase, you typically want to look for more growth-oriented investments. So there's really two ways that people in this accumulation phase invest. One is stocks, which stocks have done really well over time, right? That's what stocks have done over time. And then there's bonds. So in bonds, they have not done as well as stocks. They've done about half of what stocks have done over time. Stocks have done about, 8 to 10%, 7 to 10%. Bonds have done about 4 to 6%. So you can kind of see the differentiator here, right? But why do people invest in bonds? Why does that is the traditional way of investing? The reason why is because stocks over time, it's not this pretty of a picture. Here's really what it does, right? There's a lot more ups and downs in stocks, which is why you're going to have more growth. The more risk you take, the more growth potential you're going to get. Whereas with bonds, you're not going to have as much risk, right? But you're still going to have some, but the trade-off is you're not going to have as much growth potential over time. And so typically what we advise people to do is, if you don't plan on needing your money for 10 plus years, we probably want to have more of an equity or stock exposure so that we can get more growth over time. For long-term investing, stocks is the best way to do it, right? Warren Buffett style investing. So that's something that you want to consider there. So Joe, I like the idea of investing in that all equities versus bonds, but what do I do when the market's down? Well, if you're in the accumulation phase and you don't need this money for 10 years, then I'm going to tell you, let's not worry about it. Because if you don't need the money, then it's not a loss until you take it out. So if the market's down, I'm actually going to tell you that's an opportunity. And so what we want to look at is that if this is the market over time, right, and it goes up and down, if it's here and you're a little worried because it's down, well, think of the reference point, right? It's down, but it's still a lot more than what you started with. The other thing to think about is that this is an opportunity to buy so that when it comes back, you're buying low and then selling high when you need the money eventually. So don't get too worried when the market goes down. And the other thing to keep in mind is that if you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, you've got a long time for this money to when you need it. And so you're going to have a 20, 30 year plus horizon here. If the market's down for that long, our economy is going to have a lot worse issues going on if that's the case. So that's what we want to understand if the market's down. The other thing we want to understand is that we're not investing in cryptocurrency. We're not investing in, single individual stocks here. We're looking at what's called diversification. So, some people may just invest in one little stock, right? If you're invested in one little stock, then if that goes down, then you're going to be in trouble. So I actually had a guy come to me one time and he had $7 million in cryptocurrency. And he came in and I told him, hey, you've got 100% of your money in cryptocurrency. We need to diversify. And I told him, let's just take a few million off the plate here. Let's set it up for retirement. And so you have no worries. Well, his response to me was, I don't want to do that because this 7 million was at 11 million. And so I think it's going to come up. So it's down right now. Let's wait out the storm. I did not like his answer, but he did not listen to me. A few months down the road, cryptocurrency continued to go down. And you know what he told me again? Is my wife's kicking me right now. I wish I would have sold this and listened to what you were saying. But now it's too late. And then the last time he emailed me, he actually said he has no access to his money because the custodian who's holding that crypto is in bankruptcy. And so they're not paying out his money yet. So we're still sitting here seeing what's going to happen. But we know that his 7 million is no longer 7 million. And it's because he was not diversified and he did not invest in a smart way. So what we want to look to do is not just invest in one single holding. We want to look to diversify. What this means is we're going to have a bunch of different little individual stocks within our plan. So each of these little points here are different stocks. And so the way we do that is by not only owning individual stocks in different kinds, with a lot of our portfolios that we invest in for our clients in the accumulation phase, we do use a lot of individual stocks, but we also want to look at, ETFs, or index funds, or mutual funds. And so what these are all bundles of stocks within each one of these. So for example, ETFs and index funds, these are passive ways to invest. And each of these funds, you may have hundreds of companies that you own. For example, the S&P 500, right? So the top 500 companies, if you have the S&P 500 in one of these, then that's what you own. You've got a very small internal expense cost to run that fund, and then you're going to be able to own different types of investments. And so you need to understand too that S&P 500 may not just be enough. You may need to look at large companies, small companies, medium-sized companies, companies focused on growth, companies focused on value, and so finding that whole world of investments here. And then another way to do this is through mutual funds, which is the same idea, but now you're going to be paying a higher internal expense because you're going to have a fund manager manage those for you. So something that we do for our clients is we invest in individual stocks, which have no cost, ETFs, index funds, so that we can lower our clients' cost. And so they're not having to pay extra for mutual funds, and then we manage these for them. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not that mutual funds are bad. It just may not be something you need to pay if you're working with a financial planner who's going to do this for you. So that's the idea of diversification. So now we need to understand, what are we going to invest in from a tax perspective, right? Do we do a Roth IRA? Do we do an IRA? Or do we do a taxable investment? And so that's what we're going to talk about here. So in a taxable investment, you've got to pay taxes ongoing at capital gains rates, okay? And so in this type of investment, the money you put in up front has already been taxed. So it's taxed now, and then ongoing, you've got to pay capital gains on the growth. The next way to invest is a tax-deferred investment, which is also known as an IRA or your 401k or your 403b or whatever you may own there. In this type of investment, you are not taxed now, so it's tax-free. Now is the best way to put it. You get a tax deduction up front, you get a tax savings today. But the trade-off is that in the future, you're going to have to pay tax. So what if you start out with $1,000 and it grows to $10,000, you've got to now pay taxes on that $10,000 is how this bucket works here. And then the last bucket here is tax-free. So in the tax-free, this gets reduced. You are taxed now, but in the future, it's tax-free. And so we need to look at your specific situation to see what's the best for you. All right, so now that we have all the education, now it's time to start building the financial plan. How should we start to build this out? How should we start to prioritize what we want to do here? So I've got a list of 8 things here, and it's going to be a step-by-step list. And so once you have everything accomplished in one, you're going to move down to the second one. And so the first thing we need to understand with this financial plan is that this is going to be like a 3-legged stool. And that if this 3-legged stool is not firmly established, it's going to fall over. And so the 3 parts of this stool is cash management, wealth management, and risk management. Cash management is going to make sure you've got enough money in your bank account so you don't have to pull out the credit card. It's going to make sure that you've got all the higher interest rate debt gone, and that's what we want to make sure in cash management. 2 is wealth management. This is where, hey, we want to have enough invested for the long term. We want to make sure we're saving enough money as time goes on to make sure that we can eventually retire and have financial freedom, or be able to, give charitable, whatever your goals are, in the future is what that is going to be about. And then the third one is risk management. This is going to make sure that you've got things in place that if something bad happens, you don't have to worry about it. So home and auto insurance, life insurance, disability insurance, right? An umbrella policy. All of these are different coverages that you want to make sure you have in place in the accumulation phase to make sure that the stool does not fall over. And so you can see here, if one of these legs is out, or 2 of these legs is out in our financial plan, our stool is going to fall over. So that's what we have to remember here. So in step 1, what we're looking at doing here is, in step 1, we want to try to do all these things first. So the first thing we want to do is our 401k match. So most 401ks nowadays, they have a match on it. So if you put in 5%, they're going to match you 5%. And if that's the case, that's free money. That's the first thing that we want to do if we have that option. And so even if you have high interest debt, we still want to see you doing this, because that's a 100% rate of return if they match it. The next thing we want to do here in step 1 is to pay off debt. Now, when I say pay off debt, I don't mean paying off the mortgage that's at 3%. I talk about paying off high interest debt. What's the rule of thumb for this? 6% or more. If you have an interest rate of 6% or more, I typically advise people to pay that off sooner, unless it's a specialized type of debt. For example, student loans. Maybe we don't want to pay that off as fast. Maybe your employer's going to forgive it. Maybe the government's going to forgive it. We want to be a little more careful depending on what type of debt it is. But any credit card debt, we want to try to pay that off if it's 10, 20%. We don't want to be paying those companies more money than what they deserve. So that's going to be the step 1 there, is paying off the debt there. And then the third thing we want to look at here is typically term life insurance. So term life insurance is an inexpensive way to give you the coverage that you need if you were to pass away. So if you're married or you have kids, then this is going to be extremely important to make sure that no one's left behind without any resources to carry on. And the reason why we say term here is because term is much less expensive. And so we're going to talk about permanent life insurance down the road here, of it could be a good opportunity for you, but it's not for everyone, and it's specifically not for you early on in your planning here. And so if someone's trying to, sell you a permanent life insurance policy, you want to be very careful there and make sure that it fits within your plan of what you're trying to do. The other reason why we like to do term life insurance at this early point in the plan is that life insurance is the cheapest, the earliest you get it, and the healthiest you are. And so when is that time going to be? It's going to be now versus later, right? So that's the idea here as well. Make sure you shop this out when you're looking for term life insurance. You try to find the lowest cost. Different companies out there, some offer higher prices than others, some offer more features than others, so you've got to be aware of how all that works. And then we want to move down, once we've accomplished everything in step 1, we want to move down to point 2. And point 2 is establishing an emergency fund. So what is an emergency fund? An emergency fund is that money that you go to if something happens. Hot water tank goes out, you need repairs to your car. This is where we come to our emergency fund. We typically like to see people have $10,000 to $20,000 in here. And why is because that's going to be able to cover any big expenses that come up. Maybe you need a new roof, whatever it may be. We're able to go here to use it, so we don't have to pull out the credit card, so that we don't have to touch our investments and get penalized or taxed, is the idea with the emergency fund. Once we have all of these invested, if we have this option, I'd recommend an HSA, a health savings account. It's not for everyone. You have to have a high deductible health insurance plan, but if you have that option, then I would typically recommend you to max that option out, because you get tax deduction up front, so you save money today, and then it's tax-free when you use it for medical expenses. My other word of advice here is typically don't use this until the future. Pay all health expenses out of your pocket, let this grow tax-free, right? That's the best vehicle. In my opinion, the HSA is better than a Roth IRA. And so that would be the third step that we want to do if you have it. If you don't have it or you're already maxing it out, then we come here to step 4, and this would be a Roth IRA. With a Roth IRA, you can contribute the maximum for yourself and also for your spouse, as long as you have earned income, right? So we should be working in the accumulation phase. We should have enough to max that out. Now, if you make too much money, you may not be able to contribute to a Roth IRA. But there's something called a backdoor Roth IRA, which I'll be doing another video on, and that talks about the benefits of still getting a Roth IRA if you're over that limit. And so how a backdoor Roth IRA works from a high level, you contribute to an IRA, and then you convert it from the IRA to the Roth. Because it's a conversion rather than a contribution, it's allowed. Don't ask me how the rules or why the rules are the way they are. We just tell you how to work around them, right? What are the loopholes? So that's the idea of a Roth IRA or a backdoor Roth IRA if you have too much. For the backdoor Roth IRA, you've got to make sure you don't have specific types of accounts here, or it could lead to issues. After we've done all this, the other thing why I like a Roth IRA at point 4 here is because you can actually go into a Roth and take money out of it at any time, as long as it's your contributions. So if you contributed $5,000, you can take out $5,000 if you want to tomorrow. The other great thing is that the other thing, not the great thing, but thing to worry about is that if you put in $5,000 but it grows to $6,000, then that $1,000 of growth, if you try to take that out, then that would lead to problems if you take out the growth. But the first part, the contribution, that's going to be what's taken out first, and there's no issues, no penalty, no tax on what you contributed. And then the only other thing to worry about is if you're invested in the market in the Roth IRA and it goes down, well, then you're not going to have $5,000 because of the value of the investment. So you want to be careful about using this as an emergency fund, but do know you could tap into it if you want to. But again, this is our long-term money. We don't want to tap into it unless we have to. So that's the idea with the Roth IRA. If we're doing all this, then we want to come down here and look to max our 401k. What does it mean to max your 401k? Is to put the most amount of money you can to it per year. So for this year, it's $20,500, and so you can put that towards the 401k. And if you have a Roth option, then you could put all that to the Roth option in addition to doing a Roth IRA, and in addition to doing the rest of the plan. So that's typically what we want to see done next. Now with a 401k, you can't touch it until 59 and a half. And so if you have even a Roth in here, you still can't touch the Roth 401k until 59 and a half. That's why I recommend a Roth IRA versus this. And then the other thing to understand is that this is going to have more investment options than your 401k. Your 401k only may have 10 to 20 options there. And so this is going to give us more flexibility there. And so once we're doing all of that, then the next thing we want to look at is doing Roth conversions. So if you have any traditional IRAs or old 401ks, then you can do a Roth conversion. And so what you would do here is you would take it from that tax deferred status and move it to a tax-free status. If you do that, then you've got to pay the taxes. And you cannot withhold it from the investment if you're under age 59 and a half, or you'll face penalties. And so what we typically advise is that you're going to have to have enough money in your bank accounts to pay the tax on this. And so that's why we don't recommend it unless you're doing all of these things above this. And then you can start to look to do that and pay the taxes on the Roth conversions. So that would be step 6, or step 6. The next opportunity, if you're doing all this, then is to do a non-qualified investment. A non-qualified investment is going to be taxed ongoing on the growth at capital gains. But there's no restrictions on how much you can contribute to a non-qualified investment. There's no limits like all these other options. The other thing is you can take this money out at any time. So if you want to save for a down payment in 20 years for a bigger house, or a big old yacht in the future, whatever you want to do, this is going to be a good vehicle to invest in. And it also gives you some tax diversification within your accounts. The last thing that you may want to consider, if you've done all of this, then is to consider a cash value life insurance policy. And so with this cash value life insurance policy, the idea of it is that it's going to allow you to get some tax benefits ongoing. Now, I prefer the Roth IRA and 401k first. So we're going to not do this until we max all these out, is what we do for our clients. And then we also want to see a good amount in the non-qualified investment before we come down to this. But this is a great way to save tax-free. It can be a tax-free death benefit if you pass away, tax-free for long-term care in the future. I personally have one of these policies on myself, and it works out really well for long-term benefits if you're doing all of these things above it. And so that's what we want to think about as we build a financial plan in the accumulation phase.